Hello, my name is Brittany Chevalier McIntyre, and I'm the executive editor at Luxe Interiors and Design magazine. Thanks for tuning into our Makers segment with Yellow Goat Design on DesignTV. I'm so happy to be here today with Marketing Director Kat Gilbert and Director of Design Nicola Cassell, both of the award-winning lighting and architectural design company Yellow Goat Design. Kat joined Yellow Goat Design team in 2018 as a sales and marketing associate and has found her niche elevating and celebrating the consistently inspiring fusion of art and design that Yellow Goat provides. Nicola is an accomplished interior designer, organizational leader, and executive who contributed to the growth and expansion of Yellow Goat Design's North American division and launched the West Coast branch in 2018. During her tenure, she's worked with Google, Uber, Netflix, MGM, Sephora, and multiple hotel brands. Kat and Nicola, thank you so much for joining me today. Nicola, I'd like to start with you. Can you please tell our viewers who may not be familiar with Yellow Goat Design, what is the company all about, what you design, and what sets you apart from others?
Of course. Well, thank you for that introduction. We are a team of designers and fabricators who focus on creating bold, awesome statement light fixtures and architectural screens. We were founded over 20 years ago by a prominent artist, Jersey Lesko, on the Gold Coast, and have since expanded to the American division of Carrie Schuster. Push the boundaries of what light art can be. Our from a really diverse and sometimes unconventional design and trade background. And I think that really allows us to fuse art and technology together. Our different perspectives and robust design process really allow us to deliver those daring and forward-thinking designs that you see in our collection. And we really partner with our clients. We are with them from initial sketch all the way through to installation, and we're delivering a product that not only elevates the space, but also really excites and inspires the local community and maximizes value for our owners and developers. And I'll also mention that we're really proud members of Be Original, which is an amazing organization that celebrates and educates our industry on original design. And I think delivering creativity and authenticity is at the absolute core of what we do. So we really align with that, and that's what we stand for.
Well, authenticity, really, I know that you go above and beyond when it comes to custom. So can you describe what that means and why it's so important to your clients?
Absolutely. So designing custom allows us the opportunity to bring to life an original idea from a sketch or the client's story or brand. Our clients come to us because they don't want anything that exists anywhere else. And on the flip side, if a client is selecting something from our collection, they have every opportunity to make it their own, and they're not limited by anything. They can tweak the dimensions, the finish, the material, whatever they need to suit their individual space. And we encourage them to make it, their own. So they never have to compromise. And as designers, we hate limitations. So I think we allow them the opportunity to, make it perfect for their space. I also think it's a really fun educational and learning process, to take them along the journey of custom and what that means to us. And seeing a design come from sketch, into life is, what drives us forward every day. But I think even just hearing the client's story or their brief and then presenting them with initial proposal is still just as exciting, to hear them say, you nailed it. We are really passionate about knocking it out of the park for our clients and, showing them our ideas and our different approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kat, talking about this, process and how this all happens, can you tell us a little bit about what it's like when you're developing a new collection? I can imagine, it begins with a specific client need or an idea relating to an in-demand product. So where exactly does this creative process start?
Yeah, you're definitely correct in that we definitely look at what people need what they've purchased before, what's popular and on trend. But we also, as Nicola mentioned, we're a very artistic, creative team. And I think a lot of that approach still applies when we go to make a collection, which is usually about twice a year. One of the things we start with is usually an inspiration trip with our lead design team, usually Conrad Johnson, Desam Choi, and Christina Albu. Last year, when we could travel, it was to Milan, and they got to see the big design fair there and see the city and the architecture and really get inspired by that. And then also last year, we were able to bring Christina and Desam to New York for BDNY. And it was their first time coming to New York. They were really blown away, and that inspired a whole nother collection. So once we sort of get this inspiration under the belt, the design team will generate sort of a spectrum of ideas, and they all sit down at a weekly Monday meeting / critique that they have. And this is where we gather around, and they gather and bring all their ideas and yay or nay, veto or approve an idea. And from there, it's really just an exploration of colors and materials and shapes and, you know, different technologies that we can use to create these pieces to really bring those final designs to life. And it's super fun to see something like a trip to New York become something like our Year 3000 collection, which was sort of like a futuristic metallic based collection that was inspired by like the graffiti and the grittiness of New York. So that was really fun to see that brought to life. And certainly when we create these collections, we definitely want to look at the trends and we want to look at what's popular, but we also want to look like 8 to 10 years down the road. And we want these designs to be long lasting because often they are statement pieces and they really, you know, things around them can change, but we want these lighting designs or these screen designs to still be able to function as a centerpiece and a really wonderful statement piece. So we're looking at now and we're looking at the future and just a lot of creativity and input from everywhere, basically.
I love hearing about the process of everyone, you know, moving forward and looking to the future and what's happening right now. So now I'd like to move on to discussing some of your newest, and I must say, very cool projects. The first one I have personally seen because it happens to be located on the ground level of our office building. And I used to walk by and admire it every day. It is the American Kennel Club's iconic wireframe dog located in the front of the museum in New York City. Kat, can you tell me more about this sculptural structure that welcomes visitors and it even changes color, like the Empire State Building? What kind of lighting technology was used here?
Yeah, totally. So this is definitely one of my personal favorite projects, a museum of dog, you can't go wrong. But this was designed with Gensler, New York, and we love working with Gensler because we always know it's going to be fun and really out of the box, and it's always exciting when they bring us a proposal. So this one was with them, and we sort of started with this idea that they brought to us of a large sculptural dog. And we went through it with our design development team. We went through a lot of, you know, iterations of like, what's the material going to be? What breed of dog should it be? How should the dog be positioned? So it was really a lot of steps, which were kind of fun to work out. And eventually we landed on a wireframe welded dog that sort of acts as a beacon in the window of the museum to sort of catch your eye and bring you into the museum. And it also acts as a backdrop for the American Kennel Club television station. So that was really fun, not only for our design team, but for our production team, because at the time we had Jesse, who was a trained metal welder. And he was super excited to take this project on. He basically had to create the dog completely handcrafted metal welding from the drawings. So it was literally a very hands-on piece and really struck at the heart of, you know, being creative makers and sort of having to design from any spectrum of creativity. So 8-foot wireframe dog, super fun, special place in our heart. as creatives and makers, a really, really cool project. And it also has a ring of RGB lights that can change color. So they change the color of the dog for, you know, Pride, for holidays. It's like the Empire State Building, which is cool. So,
and who doesn't like dogs, right?
Exactly.
The next project is a quite unconventional light fixture located in the Aria Resort and Casinos Convention Center in Las Vegas. Made up of 530 leaf-like foliage clusters. It is truly stunning. Nicola, the inspiration for the piece was nature. Can you tell us more? And was this MGM's or Yellow Goat's idea to go in this direction?
Absolutely. So we worked with MGM's in-house design team. They're an amazing group. And they were working on this convention center expansion. They were going for a very elegant look. They wanted to bring the outdoors in. So the arboreal, which means living in trees, was the perfect solution. It was a piece from the Yellow Goat collection that MGM selected, and then we helped them develop it to suit the space. It ended up being almost 90 feet long, so it definitely created the wow factor that we needed. And it really captured the beauty and the harmony that they were trying to, you know, achieve in their interiors. The elements are polished aluminum in a various amount of finishes, and there were almost over 250 LEDs scattered throughout. So the sparkle in person is absolutely incredible. I had the pleasure of seeing it in person, and it just is amazing, absolutely stunning piece in person. And it really complemented the Aria brand and what they were, you know, looking to achieve.
Very cool. I would love to see it in person one day. Last but certainly not least, the magic carpet fixture that's located in the Tabor Center in Denver, which is made up of 3 layers of crystalline glass beads and is floating above the lobby space. So Nicola, this question again is for you. I would love to hear more about the design process and really, how did you get this inside? Wow.
It is a crazy piece. We worked with Davis Partnership. They're also located in Denver. This is a really prominent downtown skyscraper, and they needed a very impactful piece for this lobby, especially with the very high profile tenants that occupy this space. So the magic carpet, again, is a collection piece by Yellow Goat, but Davis came to us and we needed to customize it to meet the length that they required, the height. It's a really tall lobby space, and it also needed to be suspended from a skylight, which definitely proved to be challenging. So each individual crystal, which there were 9,000 of them total, which is insane, needed to be suspended from this wave-like stainless steel suspension system. The suspension system was important because it allowed us to minimize the amount of connection points when, you know, hanging this from an atrium. So hats off to Davis. This is such a special piece. They're always willing to take risks and really push the boundaries and come along for this journey with our team, and they're an amazing partner.
So my last question is for Kat. As a design company, and given the current challenges in our global climate, how has Yellow Goat Design adapted, and what are your newest offerings?
Sure, yeah. So obviously, you know, when everything started with the pandemic, we did have to think pretty quickly about how we were going to proceed. Lighting has always been our bread and butter, and we love it and we'll never stop doing it. But we do also offer sort of screens and sculptural pieces as well, and we always have. And these made more sense to look at when thinking about issues like social distancing and cleanability in spaces. So we sort of immediately snapped into action and started talking with our design team about creating a new collection. And this was called the Connect collection. It's the Safe Screen collection, and it's a series of screens that not only are really functional and made for social distancing, cleanability, functionality, but also made to be really great designs. And I think that's at the heart of what we do, is really design first and functionality second. And we sort of had to reverse those this time a little bit and sort of balance them out, because functionality is so important now when designing for these new spaces. So we have a lot of really cool elements, beautiful decorative screens. We have screens that are modular, can be on wheels. We have screens that are suspended and can be on ceiling rails. We have some acoustic options because obviously spaces now are a little bit differently arranged and acoustics can really matter. And we do have some elements that incorporate botanics. Some of them have planters, or you can add elements that incorporate plants into it. So we're really thinking about like the mental health of spaces and how great design can really increase a sense of security and safety in these new spaces, as well as be functional, cleanable, mobile, and just really beautiful pieces. So that's mostly what we're looking at. And then we're also sort of in the process of releasing a new digitally printed screen collection. It'll be based on some designs that we've already made for some of our laser cut metal screens, but in a digital printed capacity. And things like the color of the ink will be customizable, patterns, framing. So that's going to be really fun and a really budget-friendly collection as well, a really useful collection if you sort of need to split up your spaces pretty quickly and, you know, rearrange things quickly. So we're really thinking about what the consumer and what a designer needs right now, foremost, but we're also just, as always, trying to keep it really cool and really beautiful. So definitely if you want to check out those collections, sign up for our newsletter so you get a little ping when it's up, or check out our social. We'll have it on there as well.
Yeah, both of these new offerings are, you know, all about form and function. They're very cool and very beautiful. So I really urge everyone to check them out. Kat and Nicola, it was an absolute pleasure to chat with you today about Yellow Goat Design. Thanks again for your time. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in to DesignTV. My name is Brittany Chevalier McIntyre, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Kathryn Given, Senior Style and Market Editor at Luxe, Interiors and Design magazine. Thanks so much for tuning into our Maker segment on DesignTV. I am thrilled to be chatting today with Amy Commons McNay, who is the Creative Director at Sun Valley Bronze, the makers of beautiful hardware and beyond. The very dynamic family-run company actually does much more than just hardware. So much goes into each piece that you guys create. I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about it. You guys are real artisans. So Amy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Very excited to chat. So maybe just to start it off, do you want to talk a little bit about your role in the company and Sun Valley Bronze in general?
Yeah, sure. So I'm creative director at Sun Valley Bronze, and that means that I'm involved with everything from product design to photography and art direction to our website to advertising. So I wear a lot of hats, but we all do. It's a family business. So that's sort of my role. In terms of Sun Valley Bronze, our business was started in about 1992. All of our studios and foundry are just outside of Sun Valley, Idaho. And it's a family business, so we all work together on a regular basis, and we all complement each other in terms of what we bring to the table, which sort of makes it this very inspiring and kind of creative environment. So we love what we're making, we love the process, and we really just kind of love what we do. So.
Well, bravo. I love celebrating, family-run businesses, especially in this day and age. It's very impressive. But I know that there are a lot of steps that go into creating each item that you guys do, really from design to prototyping to the foundry and then finishing stages. I'd love if you could just walk us through the process a bit and talk about the different stages.
Right, sure. Yeah, this is actually a part that I love about our business. I love to share it with our community because it is so visually interesting. It always starts with design. So it is a design from a client or a design that we generate in-house. From that point, we go into the pattern making process, and we can do that at two different ways. We either build the pattern by hand in our wood shop, or we create a 3D, CAD drawing model, and then we send it to our 3D printer. We have this kind of state-of-the-art 3D printing lab now, and so we'll develop a sample that way. Once the sample is approved, we create what's called a match plate. And without being overly technical, a match plate is a very specifically designed board for casting that is two-sided, and it allows us to create multiples of one piece. So after we make that, we send it to the foundry, and the match plate is, we pack sand, water-based sand, around the match plate. And what it does is it creates negative space inside of the sand once we remove it, where ultimately we're going to fill that with bronze. And so once it's ready for casting, we get into the casting phase, and we heat up the ingots to about 2200 degrees. And we do that in a crucible. We use an induction furnace, and it's all kind of technical, but I have seen this process a million times, and it is so cool to watch. I'm dazzled by it every time. It's one of my favorite parts of the entire process. I mean, it's really neat to see metal being poured at over 2000 degrees. So so we do that, and then we pour the metal into the molds. Once it cools, we break out these, what we call trees, and they're these big trees that have all of the different parts coming off of them. Cut them apart, we grind them, we sand them, we tumble them, and then we send them to our machine shop. Our machine shop is, it's a state-of-the-art machine shop that has all computer operated CNC machines. So we put a lot of effort into this specific area of our company. We're really looking for the ultimate functionality, longevity, serviceability, all of these things. So machining is critical. It's not something that you always see, but it is really a very super important part of the process. And so the parts all kind of go through this meticulous machining process, and then we send it to the finishing and assembly, which is like the last stage. And either the parts get dipped in a patina bath, or we continue to finish them by hand. They get checked, they get packaged up, and they get sent out. So it's sort of this long, elaborate, very hands-on process. But it's very artful, and there are all these beautiful moments throughout it, and it's a really exciting process.
I think what's so interesting to me is that you guys are using some techniques, like casting that are centuries old, but then you're also using sort of some newer digital processes. So it's really this combination maybe of the two. I don't know, I just find it fascinating. But, as a creative director, I'm always curious, how do you decide on styles and what to produce? Is it a lot of feedback you're getting from customers, or are you really in the market looking to see what's out there? I'm always fascinated by, how you decide to, hey, we're making this design.
Right. I mean, it happens a number of ways. Sometimes it is driven by an architect or an interior designer that comes to us, and they'll want to carry a specific line or a concept throughout their entire project. And so we'll work with them to develop a new line of hardware or, a specific product to work in their project. Sometimes it comes from us, and sometimes we're inspired by the things around us, or or even the process, that we go through to make things. Sometimes it's, we all have art backgrounds. So, sometimes it's something that we're experimenting with, and we get inspired by that. So it can come from a number of things.
So I want to pivot for a sec and talk a little bit about what's top of mind for a lot of people, and that's getting, materials into their home that are safe and they're clean right now. And I realized that bronze is antimicrobial, I believe. So can you just discuss some of those properties and why it's great to have Sun Valley bronze in your home right now, really?
Right. Yeah, no, this is very relevant right now. And we have actually not done anything different or changed anything about our product. This is just the bronze is naturally antimicrobial because of the high copper content that's in the alloy. So there have been a ton of studies over the years about copper and its advantages, and our particular alloys, our silicon bronze is almost 94% copper. So it has, that's a very significant amount of copper that's in that metal. Our white bronze is about 61, our brass is about 60, but still we have, it's, very high copper content. So we are able to take advantage of the antimicrobial nature of the copper because we don't actually put any lacquer over our parts when we're making them, our hardware. So there's no barrier between the metal and the end user. So it's really, and we need to share this a little bit more with our community because it is so important, but it has always been there, and it's amazing. It really is.
I feel like this will even be more important moving forward, bringing these types of materials into your home. But I also know that your company has a mission to operate with integrity, which I love. I feel like that should be the mission for almost anyone, right?
Yeah.
But you've put a lot of effort into being a sustainable company. And I think almost all of what you create waste-wise is recyclable, which is kind of amazing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can you just discuss what sustainability really means to Sun Valley Bronze?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that we're really proud of. In 2018, we were recognized by the state of Idaho as a pollution prevention champion, I believe, and it was a big deal to us because we have put so much effort into this area. And from like the sand that we reuse in the casting process, all of the sand is reconditioned, so we use it over and over again. There's no waste. We use a water-based sand so there's no, so it doesn't affect the air quality. We recycle the bronze scrap back into our castings. We recycle the metal shavings in machining. Our packaging is recycled and biodegradable. So really from start to finish, every aspect of the company is sustainable. And they were it was the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. They really thought that we were kind of a leader in the state of Idaho for reducing our footprint. And it was really, I have to give a shout out actually to my brother Josh Commons, because he is really the one that made this a priority for Sun Valley Bronze, and he did a tremendous job of changing our systems and going all the way through the company to make sure that we are doing absolutely everything that we can to protect our environment. So it's really exciting. We're really proud of that.
Yeah, it's so important in this day and age. And again, bravo to you guys for making that a priority. So it's funny, I love all of your hardware, but I'm also such a fan of all of your kitchen and bath pieces. I know you do fittings, faucets, sinks, lots of beautiful lighting. So there's really, you're so much more than hardware, really. And I understand you do a ton of custom work as well, but can you just talk a little bit about your product line? And I'm curious to hear a little bit about what you do custom, because I'm sure some of the projects you've seen have been really incredible.
Right, yeah, no, so we have done everything from furniture to lighting to sinks, faucets. We have made bronze plaques for basketball stadiums. We have made bullnose for staircases. I mean, really, it's an unlimited, we have unlimited capabilities. And the reason why is because we do control all phases of our process, all phases of manufacturing. So if we have an idea, we can make it. If an architect or a designer has a thought, we can help them create that. And so our line has grown over the years to, I mean, I can't even imagine, I mean, 10,000 products or something, all of these, cabinet hardware, bath accessories. And it's because we can go off in a direction and try things. So it's really exciting. I mean, I actually feel like there's so much more to do. So.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. I love that. I'm curious, I know, was lighting was that more of a recent introduction? Because I know that's so technical, and to get all of the electric correct, did that take some time to sort of perfect, or?
Yeah, we started with that, quite a few years ago, and we work with a company to do all of the UL listing, and we've collaborated with people on our lighting, and we've been doing it for quite a while. And we have a lot in the works there too. I suspect that we'll have a lot more to add to our collection in terms of lighting in the near future.
Nice.
So.
Well, it's always so wonderful chatting with you. I know you have a few new collections coming up too. Are you sort of always in the process of thinking what's next? I feel like even as an editor, I'm always, 5 months ahead. I'm sure you're maybe like a year or two ahead, but I know it's hard to focus on like the here and now, right?
Yeah, no, we actually have a new collection that I just got the first samples in the last couple of days. And it was a really exciting process where I worked with our design engineers to develop the new design. It's completely different than what we've done in the past. And we got to see the prototypes, and I got all the whole process that I just talked to you about. We got to follow this one piece or this one collection through, and I just got the samples in my hand a couple of days ago. And it is so exhilarating. I am so excited to get the photography done and get this out into the world. And it's, becomes part of the family. It's really exciting.
It must be so validating when you finally see those pieces, right?
Yeah.
But Amy, a big thank you. I so enjoyed chatting with you about Sun Valley Bronze and really all that you have upcoming and all that you guys really do. So big thank you for joining us today on our Makers segment, and to our viewers, stay tuned for what's next on Design TV, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Bingham Dewart, and I am Luxe's Southern California, Los Angeles, and Pacific Northwest Homes Editor. I am delighted to be taking you on another exclusive home tour, this time of a wonderful house in Laguna Beach by one of my favorite Southern California designers, Lisa McDennon, a fellow Lisa. We featured this house in our March-April issue of this year, which feels like an entire lifetime ago for so many reasons. And I am so happy that Lisa is here to walk us through some of the work she did on this house. So for those of you who don't know, Lisa is herself based in Laguna Beach, and she is, besides being an interior designer, she is multifaceted. She owns the Laguna Beach shop Nuance Home and Lifestyle, which recently moved to a new location, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, we just actually moved downstairs.
That's very exciting. So you have everything in one spot. And then she also has a namesake collection of lighting with Hinckley that you've had for, what, 3 years or so at this point?
Yes, 3 years.
So she's a very busy lady. This project that we are going to take you through was a collaboration among her, the architect Jeff Sumich, general contractor Mark Stoddard, and had landscape architecture by Carol McElwee. And it was photographed by one of our favorite people, Karen Millay. So I am so excited to be able to walk you through this amazing house. So I always like to start out, how did this project come about? I heard that it was sort of through maybe the water polo community.
Yes, it was. Thank you. I should thank my children, really. So yes, my daughter and the client's daughter played water polo together on the same team. And so we were constantly, cheering on the sidelines together. And of course, the parents all get to know each other fairly well. And we were just, team moms, and client came up to me on the pool deck and he was like, so I hear, do you do design work? I heard you kind of like, I know, he's like, it's so weird. He's like, I just really know you as like Riley's mom. I just know you as a water polo mom. And I was like, yes, actually, I've been, you know, at that time it was like, you know, yeah, I've been designing for 18 years. And he was like, oh, I had no idea. And so we just, it kind of broke the ice that way. And he said, well, maybe you can come over sometime. We're working on this project. And anyways, that's how we met. And I ended up meeting with them at their existing home and walking through the plans with them. And that's how we began. But it was quite funny in the beginning because we had no idea the relationship that we were going to develop.
And so what were your first impressions of the house and what they were looking to achieve?
Well, it was thrilling, really, because anybody that knows the work that Jeff so much does will realize that he creates beautiful, iconic architecture. He really pushes the envelope and I think brings a whole new breath of fresh air to modern design in Southern California. And so looking at the programming that he and the clients had already created was so wonderful that to me it was being handed, you know, a project like on a silver platter, right? Everything was already so lovely. It was a treat for me to be able to come in and add the layers I needed to in order to finish the project.
So what was your brief? What were they asking of you then? At
that point?
Yeah.
So I didn't start on the project initially. I was brought in a little bit later and they were already under construction, which normally on a project, you know, I would be involved in the concept phase in the beginning. But in this case, I was brought in maybe halfway through the process. So the lovely part was, you know, there were already a lot of the things that were established, the general color palette of the house, the architectural materials were essentially fairly well established. And so for me, it was really finishing everything. You know, I came in and analyzed the lighting plans. I created the furniture layouts. We designed any cabinetry that hadn't already been, you know, designed. We reviewed anything existing, selected all the final finishes, and then really were able to come in, manage and supervise the construction at the end and do all of the furnishings.
So that's an interesting question because so as with most folks, you like to be there kind of at the inception of a project, and so this was you came in at a different point. So how for you did that change your creative process, coming in maybe, you know, midway rather than at the very beginning?
Right. I think when something like that happens, and you know, it happens from time to time, that it's really important to be a really good listener. And so that's when, and that's how I approach most of my projects anyways, but it's sort of, you know, close the mouth, open the ears. I'm a sponge. I needed to really wrap my arms around everything that had already been decided so that I wasn't coming in, you know, you never as a designer want to come in and be the bad guy saying, oh, that doesn't work, this doesn't work, this has to get torn out, you know. So it's really important to take the time to assess the situation and then, you know, really put together a cohesive design concept that incorporates everything as much as possible that's already been decided, if that makes sense.
For sure, for sure. And so kind of jumping back to Jeff, you know, you're dealing with really strong, amazing architecture. And how did you work with the architecture in this house? Because it is such a strong kind of statement piece of construction.
Right. Well, I mean, clearly you have to embrace it. And it was exciting. And all the detail that was already established architecturally, you play off of that. And so for me, I become inspired. And I think Jeff and I really feed off of one another. And then you start this sort of collaboration together, and it's, you know, you're bouncing ideas off of each other, and it's exciting. And I think that, you know, you put your heads together and you end up, and with the client as well, the client was very, very involved in the design process. And so I think with that it was nice. It's very much a reflection of what the clients wanted. And then with Jeff and I being able to collaborate together and bounce ideas and elevate the project, for me, it was a source of inspiration.
So how did you approach the living room? What was your kind of overall vision for that space, and what were you hoping to achieve in that room? Because it also has a couple of, you know, really great pieces of art in there as well.
Yes, yes. So for the living room, really the great room, which contains the living room, dining, kitchen, and family, it's essentially one space that is experienced as one. To me, I felt that the client really came to me and said, look, we have this beautiful modern home, but we don't want it to feel cold. We want it to be warm and inviting. We want people to come in and put their feet up. It's a beach house. And so, and then to this whole Balinese influence that they brought to the table, for me, I felt like the color palette, the design aesthetic, the architecture, the lifestyle, to me really, really felt that pulling in a mid-century modern interior furnishing scheme would be able to encapsulate all of those elements in a seamless way. And so that was really taken with a lot of enthusiasm, and we really went in that direction in terms of selecting the furnishings. And for me, it's really important that the interiors don't overwhelm the architecture, but that they enhance it, and it's a layered approach.
So I loved in that space, you've got those really fantastic saffron armchairs, which was that a hard ask? Because it's not usually a color that people are like, of course, that's a I love that color. How were those easy sells, or
I think so. I mean, I was a little nervous about that because, you know, people are typically afraid of color. I like using color, but not too much color. And for me, I was obsessed with this saffron. And, you know, you can imagine how many swatches of fabrics we went through in order to get the perfect one. And Mara loved it. You know, she loved it, and we were totally on board. It was very exciting. She's always looking for something kind of different and outside the box, and we had her full support. So it was really exciting. So yeah.
And I wanted to jump back because you said something about the Balinese influence in the house, and that's kind of one of the through lines, at least with the architecture. Trying to remember the backstory, but I think that the clients had honeymooned on Bali, and that was such a resonant place for them that they really wanted that moment to sort of be infused throughout the house. And then coincidentally, Jeff is from Australia, so they had sort of a South Pacific kind of connection there. So can you talk a little bit about how, in particular, that sort of Balinese thread sort of informed your design thinking in the house?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that was also, again, looking at all the existing elements when you come into a project, that was also a very key part of the design directive, is that they had really pulled almost an entire container worth of artifacts and furnishings and artwork from their trips to Bali. And we had a lot of pieces that we were able to work with and incorporate into the project and determine placement. So, and even both exterior and interior, I think Jeff and the client did a beautiful job, of course, putting in those gorgeous vertical members just to the left of the front door. There are essentially key areas where there's sculpture, for example, on the upstairs which Karen photographed beautifully, represented beautifully in the feature. The top stairwell at the end, there's that gorgeous sculpture at the very end behind the glass windows. So it was a treat. It was a treat to be able to have all these beautiful things in my toolbox to play with. And again, I think that lends to the depth of the project, the warmth, the intrigue. The carved panels in the entryway are so dynamic, and it's a very inviting, warm feel in the house. I mean, it's hard to leave once you walk in.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is so, at first blush it seems very contemporary, but then you take a moment and it seems warm and it seems inviting because there are these more textural and resonant moments. It's not just hard, shiny surfaces and very cold stone. It's all together, which is just so fantastic. And so, did they come with those pieces? So you had those initially. You had them in your plans from the get-go. That those were things that they really wanted, and that you were going to work around and work into your schemes.
Yes, and two, there was editing involved because they had a lot of pieces to work with, and so I think for me it was more. I got to pick really the best of everything that they had to choose from, and then it's an editing process as well, because there's a point where you don't want to overdo. And so in that case, there were times where, less was more. And you just allow the one beautiful piece, in the living room, the coffee table, let that speak volumes and not bury it with another piece like right next to it and so forth and so on. And so I think it was sort of making sure that we were just sprinkling these gorgeous pieces throughout the property and allow you to experience it as you travel through the space.
Right, exactly. I wanted to kind of continue on that, the tack of art. I know that art is very important to you. You work with some art advisors very regularly. I know you host gallery openings for local artists at Nuance. So you're very, very connected. What is your curatorial process like, just in general?
Well, in general, it's again very client involved. I like to and art is so personal. And in this particular case, we ended up doing several rounds of art curation, working with a couple different advisors. And then there were a few pieces that Mara and Steve really focused on themselves. And so in this case, I stepped back a little bit from being too forceful, recommending pieces. They already had some beautiful art pieces, and so my involvement in this particular residence was placement, and then of course just exposing them to different artists, letting them just have their own personal discovery in terms of sharing both local resources and local artists, as well as artists from Los Angeles and their surrounding areas. And then really they took it upon themselves to find things that they mutually agreed upon. And there were some commissions in the house too. So I think that was a process. And I would say like towards some of the art pieces ended up kind of trickling in towards the very end of the project, while there were some that were definitely had a strong presence from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that leads me to something that we had just talked about. That was sort of it didn't get completed until after our the photography and our feature, but it's a really fun space, and that had a custom element to it, a custom art element. So I would love for you to just kind of take us into that sort of after the fact space that is so intriguing.
Sure. So we have the lower level. It's 3 levels in the house. So the lower level is their home entertainment. They have a big, huge screen TV. There's a community table with a bar and a wine room and a gym area, powder bath. It's really cool down there. It feels very loungy. When you walk in, it's a step down, and there you are presented with a very, very large, expansive wall. And so we went through several iterations of, okay, well, what do we want to do with this wall? And there's a pool table down there. And so there was concern about, okay, if I have a really nice canvas, I don't want, a pool cue to accidentally make its way into the canvas. And Mara had seen some other work I had done with custom wall covering, and she really thought it would be fun to do kind of a graffiti wall on this wall downstairs. And so rather than trying to find something that was already pre-made, I had suggested that we work with a local artist, Diana Garreau, and she and I have worked together for years. She's a textile designer as well as a jewelry designer, and I've carried a lot of her pieces in my store, but we built a relationship together, and I introduced Mara and Diana together, and we showed Mara some of the custom wallpaper work that we've done before, and it just took off from there. So we created, I think it was 26 feet long, and I think it's about 10 or 11 feet tall. And we created this really colorful, very layered art mural that was to me, a real representation of the client in terms of their interests, their likes, their colors, all of that. And so in the process, consulting we went through a couple different iterations to get to the very, very final design, but it's truly unique. It's truly theirs. Nobody else has anything else like it. And it's amazing when you look at the before picture of just this white wall, and it kind of, space feels a little disconnected. And then you see the mural installed, and it's it just blows your mind. I mean, it's amazing. It creates this magic in the room, and the room has this cool kind of chic vibe now. I think it's really fun.
It is really, really fun. And just like it's transformative, as you can see. Now another question I had was about texture, and because that house is full of wonderful texture and wonderful kind of sculptural moments and things like that. So I wanted sort of jumping back and forth in my mind here, but can you talk to me a little bit about the sort of textural moments that you worked through the house?
And I mean, for me, it's always texture. I love the juxtaposition of, in the kitchen, the steel panels with the glossy lacquered paint on the refrigerator doors, and then the raked granite finish on the countertops, and then the blonde matte wood floors. And for me, there are times where you can have too much of it, but I think we did enough in order to make it work. And again, to me, when you have a really contemporary interior, the texture and the textiles are really important because they balance those hard lines, and they soften. And of course, we're in a coastal area, so having that organic, natural sensation is really important. Durability is really important, and that coziness. And so that's what I'm always trying to bring. But I love kind of mashing together different elements to see what ends up. It's like making a recipe, it ends up tasting really good when you're all done.
Right. Do you cook? Do you also?
I do. I wish I had more time to, and I literally am constantly compiling all these recipes, and my husband and I do a lot of cooking on the weekend, and Now my kids are getting involved. I mean, I am definitely not the Martha Stewart, but I have a lot of fun doing it and I like exploring. But for some reason, I'm a total foodie, and for some reason I'm always describing design like food. And I'm always saying like, oh, that's so yummy, or, oh, you know, and we're always relating things to food.
I love that. And then I can't talk to someone who has a lighting collection without addressing some of the lighting in the house. So, for example, over the dining room table, I love that fixture. That's a great fixture. Can you talk to me about sort of how you settled on that one?
Yes, I can. It's actually a pretty fun story. So we went back and forth. So that particular light fixture that you're referring to is called the Run, from my collection at Hinckley. And we had gone round and round with whether or not to install a chandelier over the dining table or not in this particular house. And you would think me, somebody with a lighting collection, would be like, oh, we have to put a chandelier over the dining table. But it was really weird. In this particular instance, my instinct was to pause on that. And we had many, many conversations as a design team with the client, et cetera. And I just wasn't convinced that we should even put a chandelier over the dining table. But I did have an opportunity I really wanted to feature the Wren chandelier. And I asked Mara at one point, I said, would you mind if I brought it in and installed it to do some photography? And then if you don't like it, we can take it down. I said, I will not be offended at all. I said, but I think that your house is a perfect setting for the fixture. And so, I know we've gone round and round with whether to do it or not. And the fact of the matter is this particular light is so airy. And I feel in many ways it's kind of minimalistic, it's organic, it was mid-century, and influenced by a lot of mid-century design. And so, of course, I installed it thinking that, oh, there's no way they're going to want to keep it. We're just going to, do the photo shoot and take it down. And they love it. They were like, no, it's perfect. We want to keep it. And so that is how the Wren landed in their dining room.
So it wasn't even supposed to be there, and yet now it is a beloved piece. I'm curious, just as since that is your piece, what was sort of your vision with that, your design process with that particular piece?
With the Wren chandelier? Yeah. So for me, I really wanted to design a fixture with really sleek, long arms, right? So I think I have this thing about long and slender. I think maybe it's just because I'm like short and not slender, So I just wanted to create this really sort of sleek, elongated piece. I love gold leaf. So I wanted to incorporate something with a gold leaf finish because I love the glow that the light emulates around the gold leaf finish. And then sometimes I just am inspired by nature. I could be walking along the beach and I see some interesting bark texture on a tree and I'll snap a picture, or I see waves in the sand and I'll snap a photo, and then I go back and I utilize those and I just start sketching. So I created kind of this pod, and it was a pod that if you think about it, the light in itself is like a pearl sort of nestled into this pod. And it was all about creating a soft glow. And as it evolved, it just really had this very mid-century aesthetic that I dug. I thought it was fun and cool. So.
And it just looks so amazing over that dining table. That the sort of the play off of those two pieces is really just stunning. So wanted to ask a couple of last things as our time is winding down. But beyond the chandelier or the dining room lighting conundrum, were there any other kind of naughty design challenges that you had to think about with the house that kind of had to give you pause and maybe challenged you in a different way?
Yes, actually, my first ever really, really oversized bed in the master bedroom. And so, you know, I had approached it sort of your typical master bedroom with a California king bed and large nightstands on either side. And then we're through the design process, and you know, clients came to me and they're like, look, this room is huge. Like, what, could we do a bigger bed? And they were like, oh, it'd be so cool to do like 2 double beds side by side. And then all I could be thinking of is like, oh my God, how are we going to design the bedding? You know, like, oh my God, that's so huge. So, but we went with it, and actually we created a custom bed frame. They're motorized beds, which is super cool. So we did like this whole platform system and everything. And then it was a matter of, okay, how do I find a beautiful tailored fabric for the duvet that isn't going to need like an army to put it on the bed, right? Because we know how heavy those blankets and duvets can be. And then to, you know, that it's not going to wrinkle, because, you know, nobody's getting into the middle of those 2 double beds to smooth anything out. So we did quite a bit of research and testing on fabrics in order to do it, but it all worked out in the end, and it's pretty fun.
Awesome, awesome. I wanted to ask, on a personal level, how did this project resonate with you? You know, in your portfolio, when you think about this project now that it's in the books, what springs to mind?
Oh my gosh. You know, I think I touched on it earlier, is that when you come into the house, you don't want to leave. And I mean, obviously I've just, in my 20 years, I've designed a lot of houses, and I thoroughly enjoy everything that I've done. And I totally live vicariously through all my clients, and, you know, I love it. But coming into their house, you actually have this like emotional response of just like taking an exhaling breath, right? You just walk in and you're just automatically relaxed. And I feel like you just step over that threshold and you're kind of transformed. And it's true. I mean, people come and they don't want to leave. And so that to me is a really, I feel like it's a win when that happens, you know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. It was so great to have you join us and to walk us through this house, because it, you know, as I look back on 2020, this is a bright spot that I was able to feature your work, because I'm such a fan of yours and the work you do. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and you need today, and stay safe and take care.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your support. I'm so happy to be part of the Luxe family.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
How can we move architecture and design towards the circular economy? How can we start to think of closed loops within architecture and design? I'm very thankful to have with us a group of panelists who have attempted to do that in many parts of their work, and who've certainly been grappling with that idea. We have with us today Anita Snyder, who's Environmental Sustainability Manager at Armstrong Ceiling and Wall Solutions. Anita, thanks so much for joining us. Ellen Mitchell-Kozak, who is Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Leo A. Daly. Ellen, thank you for joining us as well. Joshua Gassman, who's Sustainable Design Director at Lordex Sargent. Joshua, thank you for taking the time. And Roxanne Spears, who's Vice President of Sustainability North America at Target. Hi, Roxanne, thank you for joining us today. Joshua, I'd like to start with you. You led the design of the Candida building, which is one of the most sustainable buildings recently built in the United States, a Living Building Challenge certified building, LEED Platinum. We published a great piece about it in Metropolis as well. Can you tell us some ways in which thinking about the full life cycle of that building impacted your work on it? Why was life cycle assessment important to that project, and what opportunities does it present to you?
Thanks, Avi. That's it's a great question. Thanks for having me. You know, I want to start with this idea, and George touched on it as well, that all of the issues that we think about in the world of sustainability are all interconnected, right? And so when we talk about low embodied carbon, and we talk about removing toxic materials, and we talk about equity, and we talk about circular economy, they are all different sides of the same coin. That's not a good metaphor for that number of sides, unless you have some strange dice coins. Anyway, you know, there's a lot to it as you start to think about what it means to build with all of these influences kind of entering your thoughts at once. And, you know, it requires a large integrated team. It requires a lot of expertise. I would be the first person to say that I am one representative of a team of hundreds of people that help bring the Candida building to life at Georgia Tech. I think, you know, when we start to think about life cycle and impact, we have to think about it not just in terms of material, but also in terms of program. You know, one of the things we talked a lot about on the building was this idea of long life and loose fit, right? So the building is an academic building. It has auditoria, it has some teaching labs, it has offices, it has some classroom, and it has a general student gathering space. But all of those spaces are designed with a certain regularity and a certain modularity that allows them to be interchangeable over time. And the systems, for example, within those intermediate walls are not actually carried in those walls. And so they're easily demisable, and the labs, for example, could easily become larger. And the idea being that the building's life cycle is intended to be 150, 200 years as we start to think about what it means to hold the building. And when you start to think about buildings going beyond a 50-year horizon, you also want to start to think about what it takes to maintain them. And we talked a lot as a team and with Georgia Tech about this idea that buildings that are loved are maintained, and buildings that are maintained and loved last a long time. So the idea of creating a building with that type of time horizon is not just about designing a building, it's about creating a culture around that building and getting people to love it and to want to be in it and to want to be a part of it. And so then that starts to connect other dots, right? So now you start to say, okay, well, why do people love certain types of things, and what is it about them that they love, right? People love being in daylit spaces. People love wood as a material. There are a number of these things, and you know, there's a general term that buzzword these days, you know, thinking about biophilia and biophilic design, and that has an impact on these ideas as well as you start to think about what it means to create these buildings. But it also has, there are also direct material consequences, right? So the choice to build a mass timber building is a part of that. That hits all of the issues that that I listed a minute ago. But it also has to do with, as Georgia, you mentioned this, also making a building that's deconstructible, right? Wood is easily taken apart, provided, and then it's used as a subpart of other constructions, and not necessarily downcycling, but actually in many cases actually upcycling it. And in Candida, the other material component we started looking at was reclaimed and materials. You know, if we want to think about a circular economy, we have to make sure we create a market for the things that we are reusing and trying to find new homes for, and that we're upcycling. We used a lot of wood from other buildings that were being taken down around us throughout the building. We also, and this is an important part to think about as well, when you start to think about how modular the building is, and we started to understand that the building module wasn't necessarily the manufacturing module for certain components of the building. So for example, the building has nail laminated decking, and that nail lam deck is made up of 2x6s and 2x4s. Most of the 2x4s are reclaimed, but the 2x6s are in fact, because our structural grid is 10'6", we had to buy 12-foot long 2x6s because that's the next size at which they're manufactured. And that gave us thousands and thousands of 18-inch long 2x6s that otherwise in a more conventional thought process may have either been disposed of or downcycled in some way. We were actually able to give them to our mill worker, and we built a series of stairs inside the building out of those scrap parts, and actually upcycled them immediately inside the building.
Right. There's just so much in that, I think just to pick apart a couple of things. One is, designing for deconstruction. As George mentioned, and then you picked up on that thread, we have to think about, how we're designing elements right down to the little details. And I love that story about the wood in the building. You can close loops within a construction site as you did. You might also be able to close larger loops, return material to source or manufacturer. There's so many opportunities within that. But I think the sort of bigger insight, I think, related to designing for deconstruction is what you said about the longer life cycle of buildings. It's interesting that, as architects and designers grapple with adaptive reuse, and I'm sure we're going to hear from the other panelists about this as well, we make it okay for us to use historic buildings. The hospitality sector in particular has done great things with that in the last few years, and to my opinion, hasn't received enough credit for it, turning historic buildings into hotels and venues and things like that. We've seen offices take root in existing building stock. And then if we turn the telescope around and look through the other end, right, then that means that we're building for future adaptive reuse. So, that idea of long life and loose fit is so important, because, you're building a building that hopefully others can steward. And that is such a fundamental shift in thinking about architecture. Thanks so much for that, Joshua. I'd love to bring Anita in on this. Anita, we're talking about recycling individual building materials. You have been part of Armstrong's recycling program for many years now. Pioneered it in the many years ago. You have a long history of trying to divert materials from landfills. What have been some important successes you've had or milestones that you've had with that, with Armstrong in recent years? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. Thanks, Avi and Metropolis, and great to join everyone this afternoon and this morning, depends upon where you are, I guess. We have people from everywhere. So yes, Armstrong's been part of the circular economy, gosh, as you said, for over 20 years. And we've done that through the whole life cycle of our ceilings, from the beginning in terms of our operations and reducing waste there, throughout the raw materials that we choose, getting more recycled streams into our raw material stream, which of course helps in that whole reduction of embodied carbon throughout the building. And then also our responsibility for our end product. And our ceiling recycling program has been around since 1999. It actually came out of a request from a very large customer saying, we don't want to send this material to landfill. Can you work with us to come up with another solution? And so that was kind of the first milestone, was back in those 1999. And to date, we've recycled, since it's football season, I'll say 5,000 football fields, if you can picture that, of ceiling material over that time period. And certainly, in terms of successes, that is one, that we continue to have that program as long running as it has been. We continue to receive material. I think the focus on carbon is certainly helping to renew that interest in terms of looking at materials that have higher recycled streams and content as part of it, which decreases the carbon footprint. And then also that our ceilings are designed for disassembly. So as we talked about, deconstruction of a building, also deconstruction of a product. And they're very simple to remove and replace and reconfigure. Flexibility as another part. We've also just, as kind of another large milestone and success, we've also just set our 2030 goals for Armstrong. So we have 3 pillars: people, product, and planet. And of course, circularity crosses all of those. But our goal for circularity is to design our products to be recycled, reused, or repurposed, and then drive circularity in our operations and with our customers and throughout our value chain. So, I mean, my whole goal or vision would be for us to do similar to the fashion industry has done or the plastics industry, is some type of building industry platform that can really engage in circularity across all different materials and work together and collaborate to do that. So that would be a future success, but that's where we stand now.
Right, right. George started this conversation talking about asset management, and you've kind of brought us full circle to that, right? We need sort of a clearinghouse for some of these materials to make that easier. Thank you so much for talking about sort of the effort to link circularity into the 2030 goals. That's, I think, so key. We have to understand that there's really no way around current practices unless we're moving towards, more recycling, more reuse of materials. It stands to reason. There's a finite amount of material on Earth, right? And so, I really appreciate you bringing that up, Anita, and talking about how you think about deconstruction really at every level, at the building level, as Joshua said, but then at an individual building product level as well. I think that's absolutely key. Roxanne, I'd love to bring you in here. Stands to reason in every building, there's as much flooring as there is ceiling, flooring has been a big focus for closed loop manufacturing, and just because, it's used in large quantities, as I said, but also because some of the materials used in flooring in the past have been challenging to recycle. And I know that, Target has made huge strides with that. Can you talk about some of the breakthroughs that you've had in the last couple of years in terms of, making sure that you're adhering to cradle and circular principles across your product range?
Yes, thank you. We have been developing and refining processes for a number of years now. We started in the 1950s actually doing some recycling. And what we'd like to say is it's actually pre-loved resources. Those are being able to take back products or resources. We can't just throw them away anymore. So when we look at material we want to take back, we really focus on both our soft surface and our resilient products, and doing both closed and open loop resourcing on those. So for our soft surface, we've been able to do a great closed loop process where we return soft surface material. We can use it back into soft surface, or we can reuse it into our resilient products. So that's been something we've been consistently able to do for a number of years. What we have a little bit more trouble with and that we're working on perfecting is our resilient material. And part of that is with resilient material, you usually find on a trawled on adhesive that's hard to remove from the back of it. And recycling that with the adhesive on back into products is difficult as well. So in that instance, we've actually found partners who now are using our resilient material we bring back that has been post-use, and they're using it in their products. So for us, we're always looking at making sure we're maintaining that circular economy business model and cradle to cradle design philosophy. But sometimes we have to go outside of our loop to get a partner to use some of the products. But our goal is never to let those resources go to waste, making sure they're not headed to a landfill. So I think that's an important part. The other part is we're really designing products now for disassembly, so that when we design products, we know already how they can be taken apart, how they can be reused before we even sell them into the marketplace. And I think that's key as we move forward. Buildings need to be a resource. All that material going in, and we're talking just ceilings and floors right now, and we are a big part of it, but there's so many pieces. And we're taking away natural raw material that we could be reusing each time. So for Target, that's really key is we can't be wasting those resources. We've also made the commitment for a 2030 goal that we will reduce our virgin raw materials by 30%, so that is recycled content material only. And we really feel like taking that stance, we have to move to recycled content in our product. Most of the time we want it to be ours, but if not, if we can find partners to work with. And I think that's the other part of it, is really crossing all product types within a building to find out how you can work together and develop those standards of being able to cross-reference and cross-source will help us go a lot further, instead of throwing things in a landfill.
Right, right. We have George back. George, you had a comment to add here.
I'm sorry, my phone started blowing up. There are a lot of people on this call who started texting me after my speech, but really quickly, one of the things that I'm going to say is that between the architectural and design folks who are on the call and the manufacturers, something that does not get spoken, and since I'm no longer working at a manufacturer, I can say this, is that a lot gets lost because of the way we design contracts with general contractors who do the installation and who do the renovation after the fact. And so it's a lot easier and a lot less expensive when they put in that they're going to do this renovation. There's an automatic fee that's in there to accommodate that. Now, whether or not they recycle it or not is up to the sub of the sub in most instances, which is why it's very difficult sometimes to get materials back, even though you may want them back. And they're not at the place where they're making a decision about installing products. So on the business side, or your leaders are not like, well, we want to take this back. Do we want to invest in that? It's going to cost us money. We don't know if we're going to get the next project. So I'm just putting this out there that there needs to be conversations between the big players who are doing the general contracting work. And there needs to be a subline of information in terms of their responsibility of making sure the manufacturers who have product inside of those spaces are also responsible for those things rather than switching them out or just deconstructing them in a different way. And I know that that's always a very touchy conversation, but I'm in a position now where I can be your advocate for those touchy conversations. But there is a difficult thin line because the sub of the sub doesn't really have, it doesn't get passed down to that level. So it's very appropriate for both on the architectural side when you're making specifications that you engulf and engage in that part of the conversation to make sure that the manufacturers are aligned with being connected to their responsibility for taking products back or even taking the competitors' products back and using them again. And it gets even more complex on the furniture side. So wanted to drop that bomb, and if somebody wants to respond, I'm open to listen.
Absolutely. We're definitely going to come back to that because I think, you know, just hearing Roxanne and Anita speak about, you know, all their programs, and there are several manufacturers, but certainly Tarkett and Armstrong, you know, are two manufacturers at the forefront of that who have had long-standing recycling programs. And I think to George's point, one of the questions that then comes up is, you know, how can those programs be more effective, and how do we actually close the loop from existing buildings to those programs in order to empower them and in order to make them also for our manufacturers, make them, you know, viable from a business point of view. You know, the more we are able to close those sort of pain points, especially with GCs, you know, on those contracts, as George pointed out, the more we're going to have buy-in on some of the amazing initiatives that already exist in this industry. So thanks so much, George, for bringing that up. We actually will have an audience question on that, I think, soon. So everybody will get a chance to weigh in on that in a little bit. I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone before we go to Ellen and speak to her that we are taking questions throughout today's conversation. Please put those questions in the Q&A window, and we'll start taking those questions in just a minute. Questions about anything are absolutely germane, so feel free to jump in there. And if we, as you can tell, if we want to pull George back, we might be able to do that too. So just let us know if you have any questions there. Ellen, so you've heard, you know, I think obviously when we're talking about a building like the Candida building, you know, which has been designed to be, you know, living building challenge and obviously has circular strategies right at the heart of the building and its practice, there's some great best practices there. When we're talking about, you know, large volume products like ceilings and flooring, again, thanks to Anita and Roxanne, we know there's great best practices there as well. So tell us why it's important for us to push forward on those closed loop systems, not just in terms of resource efficiency, which I think we've been talking about material flows, and I thank Joshua for bringing in, you know, cultural program, culture and program as well as part of this conversation. But given your expertise, Ellen, you know, that layer of wellness and equity as well, why is it important for us to close the loop, to push forward on closing the loop, to round out really our entire focus on sustainability?
Yeah, thanks, Avi, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. You know, I think when we think about materials right now, there's just so much for us to sort of decipher and dissect and prioritize when we're making selections. The thing that's the topic of the moment right now is our growing awareness of how the materials that we select and specify contribute to the embodied carbon piece of the puzzle, and that is sort of by definition the emissions that are associated with the manufacturing, extraction, transport, installation of building materials. So I think that's important, and especially as we've heard a lot from folks like Ed Mesri in Architecture 2020, how he sort of illustrated that the embodied carbon piece of the puzzle, especially in the next 10 years, it has an outsized role in our ability to draw down carbon to maintain or to avoid the most catastrophic climate change scenarios. But I think we have a tendency to just look at, in terms of health of a product, we have a tendency to look at it just in terms of the period of time where it's installed in the building, and we don't always, we aren't able to really understand the health impacts both upstream and downstream. And George talked about this quite a bit. What, from a community health standpoint, from an equity standpoint, what is happening to the communities that are around the extraction and manufacturing process, and what is happening at the demolition and disposal process? When we've heard a lot about equity, and it's the conversation in the industry has centered a lot around the lack of diversity in our profession, and I think that that's absolutely important. But I also think that there's a big equity piece of the puzzle in terms of community health that is inherent in the upstream and downstream impacts of materials. And there's actually a really good, I think it's hard for people to grasp, but there's a really good sort of real world scenario on how this is playing out right here in my hometown of Dallas. So Dallas, there's a lot of people on the phone from Dallas, so you'll probably recognize the story. It's in the press, but Dallas is divided along north and south. And this breaks down like many other cities socioeconomically and racially, with the poorer minority communities being down south and the more fluent white communities being up north. And what has been happening is in the southern sector, there is a lovely topographic wonder called Shingle Mountain that has existed for a number of years. And what that is it is pulverized roof shingles that a recycling manufacturer, private, George, I loved your saying that it's not okay to privatize the wealth, but socialize the risk. That's exactly what's happening here. A private recycling company has dumped these pulverized shingles in a residential neighborhood that is 80% African American. And so the community members that have now turned activists are suffering from all sorts of problems. There's lung issues, there's heart issues, there's skin issues. Their children aren't able to play outside. And I think just now that this private recycling company has gone out of business, so it's now inherent upon the city to clean this up. But I just start thinking about what would happen if we did have a closed loop system as it pertained to roof shingles. This would have avoided Shingle Mountain altogether. That debris, that sort of pulverized material could have been feedstock for another product. And so when we start to think about materials and how the upstream and downstream impacts affect communities in terms of equity and environmental justice, I think that it's those kinds of things that we have to pay attention to, because we have the capacity to fix that.
Right, absolutely. I think, that's brought us full circle on this conversation. I think, so beginning with George's talk about, thinking about the full life cycle, starting from, manufacturing, leading into construction, leading into operational use, and then end of use or end of life, and then looping back, right? How do we think about material, social, as well as sort of economic impacts all along that chain? And more importantly, how can each link in that chain strengthen the links before and after? I think, that's I think really key here, because as Roxanne pointed out, sometimes the best solutions are in forming partnerships, in reaching across different product categories, in starting to look at streams beyond your own manufacturing or building stream. As Joshua pointed out, sometimes there are opportunities within the site, but you have to be able to work with those GCs, the the trades, the workers, the unions who are on that construction site, and the subs, who are able to make that change and make sure that the opportunities are taken advantage of. And then, as Ellen, what's underlying your talk is also that all of this exists within larger policy frameworks. I think we have to understand, if our recycling systems, exist as such, within businesses that obviously go in and out of business, they are using city resources, they are located within communities. Who takes responsibility for any impacts or effects that they have on those communities? So this discussion about designing full circle, I think it goes really deep and it goes really broad, but that's part of the challenge we have here today. I'd like to take a couple of questions here from the audience. Anybody else who has questions, please go ahead and put them into the Q&A tab. We'll start taking them pretty soon. There's an easy question on here. Vicky McMichael asks, is Armstrong a vendor on the Mindful Materials database? Anita, you want to talk about Armstrong being on Mindful Materials for a second?
Yes, we are. We've been a longtime supporter of Mindful Materials, and our products are there. And I've been working with that Mindful Materials team to find some way to actually raise the awareness for recycling as part of that. So, maybe keep asking those questions, like how can I increase my recycling on with products, and find a way to highlight them in some maybe separate area of Mindful Materials. But yes, we are a proud supporter.
Yeah. Quick shout out to Mindful Materials, by the way. They're piloting an equity category within Mindful Materials. So everybody look out for news on that. I have high hopes that, that will start to capture some of these social impacts of the manufacturing and building process and allow us to take some good decisions on that regard as well. George, you wanted to come in on that?
One quick question, like the other statement, not a question. The other thing is you got to give yourself some permission to forgive yourself too as a manufacturer. Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to come out, like the person who created asbestos, I saw some people cringe, right? It wasn't their desire to say, we're going to create something that you're going to have to deal with in terms of people. They created the only fire retardant that we had. We didn't have a sprinkler system in place, right? So when they created that, their intentions of design were great, but what they hadn't thought about was the impact on the people. So some of the materials that you've created in the past that may not have the best environmental story, you still have an obligation not to leave it for somebody else who has no idea what's in it to be responsible for disposing of it, right? Because they don't have any indication for what it could potentially cause, because they don't know how to handle the material. They don't know what's the composite of the material. They don't know what happened.
I think we just lost George there for a second. He'll probably come back on in a minute.
So Avi, I'd like to weigh in just on some of these ideas. I think the challenge that I think we all have, and if this point ends up calling people out, I don't mean to. I'd like to think of this more as a challenge statement for all of us to think about what it means to change the world for the better. But there are, if you think about certain sustainability certification programs that will remain nameless, they're about improving the baseline incrementally. And if you compare that to the living building challenge mentality and approach to things, it's not about improving what's not working. It's about fundamentally rethinking it and trying to build something that's actually regenerative and not using resources, right? So the high philosophical approach. And I think we need to start to think about circular economy in the same way. If we continue to think about, and this could end up becoming a critique of capitalism, but I don't think we have that much time. But if your business model is based on selling tiles or carpet or beams or mechanical systems, whatever it happens to be, it's in your own self-interest to sell more of it, right? Because you get more out of it. And to the point about socializing risk, if there isn't a way that all of that gets encapsulated back to its source, then that's exactly what we're doing. And so one way, it's not necessarily the answer, but it's an answer, a different way to start to think about the problem is to think about selling services instead of products. And this is not my idea, right? This is an idea that's been floating out in the circular economy world for a little while. But the idea, let's take Ellen, the roof shingle idea, right? If instead of selling shingles, the manufacturers sold roofing, not as a product, but as a concept, right? We will provide you with a roof. And when that roof wears out, we will replace it. It's a part of an ongoing service. And then that manufacturer is responsible for what happens to their product. And so it's in their own best interest by doing that to make it easily deconstructed, to make it safe for the workers to handle, safe for people to manufacture, and easy for them to recycle, so they can go then put it back on, whether it's your roof or your neighbor's roof or someone else's roof, to make that easy, right? And that's a fundamental rethinking of the way the economy works right now. And I think the ultimate circular economy goal to me is to get us much closer to that type of model, rather than an extractive, use it, and then, oh, if we can find someone who can reuse that, great, but maybe not, maybe it sits on a junk pile for a while. We've got to get away from that approach to the problem.
Right. Joshua, you've touched on something that's super dear to my heart. Let's take your model and apply it not just to manufacturing, but to architecture and design itself, right? So if we're a way for us all to really stand up and be stewards of the work we do is if we were also, as we are, in the business of providing space, the design of space as a service, right? I think if we were to work with the understanding that that client relationship is a relationship over time, and that building space is something that we're providing, the design of space that we're providing, as a service. If we were to start to think about that and understanding that if our engagement with a particular space is to end, somebody else is going to engage with that space and steward it moving forward. And therefore, within a professional community, we have a relationship, we have a responsibility to each other. Much as, if company X were doing roofing for a building and providing roofing as a service, and then the occupant of the building decided to go to company Y, who's also providing roofing as a service, X and Y need to be able to interface with each other. That is a situation we're in with architecture and design right now. So, as interior designers, we know every 7 years on average, the space that you're designing today is going to get renovated in 7 years. That's the industry average. In some cases, it's 3 years, as we were reminded during yesterday's conversation. So how do we as interior designers learn to be stewards of the materials that we're putting into spaces? And how do we leave, as you said, Joshua, with walls that don't have essential services running to them and therefore can be, decommissioned. As Ellen said, thinking about sort of the upstream and downstream effects. How do we start to, not just as manufacturers, but also as designers, how do we take that model throughout the industry, mirror it throughout the industry, and understand that, all of us are engaged in a sprint where we're handing off things to fellow professionals, to our peers, to people who are up and downstream from us. That's a really interesting question as well. Ellen, I'd love to bring you in just because we do want to talk about adaptive reuse and reuse of spaces and renovation as part of this conversation. Can you speak a little bit about the footprint of renovation? Because I think that's where Joshua's comments really logically are leading us. And then I'd like to come back to some of the comments we have in the audience Q&A.
Sure. Well, I'm relatively new to LEOA Daily, but one of my favorite projects that has come out of that portfolio recently is an adaptive reuse project. It's out of Minnesota, and it's called the Owatonna Power Public Utilities Building. It's an old power plant that's sort of sited alongside a river, and was decommissioned because it flooded. Every time the rains were heavy, the basement flooded, and so it sat empty for a long time, and then was repurposed into office buildings. Your point about the hospitality industry not getting enough credit, I think, is an interesting one. But in this case, this was repurposed as an office building, and it was there was a nice resilient story there about being able to let the lower level flood without sort of interrupting services. But the thing that I think about when I think about that project is, not only is there a compelling story around the amount of embodied carbon that was, I guess, saved, for lack of a better word, or the sort of the amount of embodied carbon that wasn't emitted because we didn't, the project didn't build new, they renovated. You know, that's one piece of it, is the materials preservation, but there's also this cultural preservation that I think we don't value enough, especially in the United States. And the sort of resulting design solutions that came out of that project are certainly not something that would have ever been created from ground up construction. You know, it was indicative of its place. It was unique. You could, you know, you can go into that building and certainly see how the sort of utility and the machinery and the equipment, how that manifested into the design of an office building. And we did kind of post-design, post-construction, went back and calculated the amount of CO2 equivalent that was saved by renovating that building. And it was 2.26 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent, which we, you know, you can run little calculations and it'll tell you that that is 500 cars off the road for a year, or 38,000 trees growing and sequestering carbon for 10 years. So, you know, when you start to really look at the impact on carbon specifically by making those types of decisions, you know, that you can argue that you know, that was not in the conversation at all when there was a decision about renovation versus new construction. And it is more so, I think it's more embedded in the conversation with clients and with design teams now. But even so, as you were saying, there's such a high sort of churn rate for a typical commercial office building. And over time, the amount of carbon that is emitted as a consequence of those tenant improvement cycles can start to outweigh the original embodied impact of the base building structure and envelope. So, you know, it is absolutely worth paying attention to for just so many reasons.
Right. Ellen, we're hoping to look more into that at Metropolis, and I'm sure people in the audience would find it interesting as well. I think there's huge evidence to say that interior designers actually have a much larger responsibility than they've realized in terms of embodied carbon footprint over the life cycle of a building. Just assuming that a building has, you know, a 150-year life, as Joshua would like them to have, and if they're getting renovated even every 10 years or so, and if we were to slow down the rate of renovation, you know, that's 7% that we typically assign to FF&E embodied carbon repeated 15 times over the course of a building, whereas, you know, the carbon in the concrete and steel is really a one-time, unless of course there's heavy demolition and reconstruction. So I digress. There's more to be said about the carbon footprint of interiors, but certainly as we know it right now, renovation adaptive reuse are responsible practices and they are circular practices. Ellen, can you just repeat the name of the project that you were talking about?
I'm going to put it in the link. It's the Owatonna Public Utilities.
Wonderful. Larry, Ellen is going to drop it in the chat for you to pick up on. Anybody else who's interested as well. We have a question from an audience member here that I'd love to get all of you to weigh in on. And he says, can you speak to how you work with GCs on construction waste management practices to ensure that products actually get recycled, upcycled, taken back, etc. You know, obviously this is, how do you interface with your contractors, or to take that one step further, what would you like to improve about the way that you interface with contractors and installers? What would you like to see more of in the industry? So either describe your current practices or tell us what your sort of ideal practices would be. I'd love to hear from both from the manufacturing and the architecture and design side.
Well, I'll make one comment from a manufacturer side is we would love to see more specifications written that are very clear as to what needs to happen during demolition. We're not always on site during demolition. There's always another crew doing demolition. It always seems to be lost in the shuffle. And I think if we had tighter guidelines there, either from a specification standpoint or even from city guidance, that would help us as well to make sure that that material is taken back. And I think it's important for two reasons. One is a lot of times we want that product as a resource. The second is if it does have legacy chemicals in it, we know what those chemicals are, and we know the processes that we can take to either eliminate that legacy chemical from the product or put it into another product that will encapsulate it and it will not cause an issue. If it's just dumped in a landfill, it may not be cared for the way it should be. So I think from working with the GC standpoint, we need a better connection there, and almost at the really early design stages of having that thought about as you're going in to renovate a facility is what can we hold on to, and what can we actually then recycle through the right processes.
Okay.
And Avi, I'll just jump in quick on that. I would actually go back a step further to actually the owner, and we've been seeing more and more of that as owners are setting long-term goals, and that is part of their goal: waste management, waste reduction across their entire business. They're also looking at their construction practices as well. And if that owner is driving it, then the GC certainly is going to fall in line. The architect, it starts with that demand. And we have a very successful project underway now that we've recycled over 700,000 square feet from, because we've had that owner driving it throughout that whole process. And, of course, then it's also going into their carbon story as well. So, it goes hand in hand. So I would agree with you, Roxanne. Specification. And I did put a link to our spec in the chat there. So please, any renovation project, we would endorse that as well. But going from an owner standpoint is key.
Joshua?
I would suggest thinking about two sort of how-to things that would be very helpful, I think, for most people. The first one is that while LEED has done a great job of getting construction during the process recycling out there, it made it quite common. Usually the cheapest way to do that is through single stream recycling, and there are a lot of pitfalls to using single stream. And I think as an architect, we, and as architects in general, we should be specifying multiple stream recycling during construction. That's sort of a straightforward thing to do. Yes, there is some cost depending on the size of the project. It would be negligible. Depends where you are in the country as well. But that seems like a no-brainer thing that we could do. And then the second thing is, especially if you're working on a project that has some either partial selective or complete demolition, look around in the city that you're in and build a relationship, not just with the contractor, but with local organizations that reuse or reclaim products out of buildings that are going to be demolished. Atlanta, where I lived, is lucky enough to have a group called the Life Cycle Building Center, where we were able to work very closely with them and salvage not just things that came out of adjacent buildings that we were able to use in Candida, but they were actually able to go out and find material for us during design that we could then buy from them, or the general contractor could buy from them during the design process. And so, taking the time to survey what's there, look at it, analyze it, see what's salvageable, see what makes sense, and if there's a local organization that can work with you, that's great. I know Portland has a big one. Others off the top of my head I'm not sure about, but
yeah. In the New York area, we have Building Product Ecosystems, which was actually set up by somebody who was a sustainability leader at the Durst organization, who then set up her nonprofit. So there's resources in many parts of the country. So thank you, Joshua, for mentioning that. Joshua, before I let you off, can you quickly, for anybody in the audience who might not understand, talk to us about, give us a quick example of what single stream versus multiple stream recycling would be?
Yeah, sure. So single stream recycling means that all of the things that are recyclable, and this is the way a lot of municipal residential recycling systems work, everything can go into one container, trash can, dumpster, whatever it is at the scale. And so you're putting glass and aluminum and other metals and cardboard and paper and all these other things that all eventually actually have to be sorted back out by someone somewhere. I would be very careful to say, and if you walk away from this with one thing, just remember, there is no away ever for anything. Everything goes somewhere. And so the idea of taking all of your recyclables and putting them together is causing extra work somewhere else down the road. And so multi-stream recycling then would be on a, on a construction site, you've got 6 dumpsters and each one takes a different type of recycled material, right? One of them's for metal, one of them's for cardboard, one of them's for wood, etc.
Right. Before we go any further, I just want to remind everyone we're here talking about learning to design full circle. And there is a lot of learning going on here. We're very lucky to have with us Roxanne Spears from Tarkett, Anita Snyder from Armstrong Ceiling and Wall Solutions, Ellen Mitchell-Kozak from the OA Daily, and Joshua Gassman from, I'm sorry, I just had a brain freeze. From
Lord X Sergeant.
Sergeant. I'm sorry about that. That happens very rarely with me. And of course, George Bandy Jr., who is a leader in sustainable manufacturing and sits on the boards of GBCI and IIDA as well. We were talking about GCs. Ellen, I'm wondering if you have anything to add on that. So far, we have responsible spec writing, which is, of course, really important. Thanks for that, Roxanne. Working with owners as being a great sort of leverage point. Thanks for that tip, Anita. And Joshua, as you said, being really going beyond the letter of the certification systems to think about, opportunities for recycling on site and for material streams on site. Your point about single stream versus multiple stream recycling is well taken, as well as the use of local resources that are available who might be able to provide and support reclaimed materials both in and out of the site. I think all those are great. Ellen, if you have something to add to that, that would be fantastic, and then we'll keep going.
Well, maybe just to reinforce how important specifications are on the sort of design side of things as well, making sure that the design selections that we are picking out are in line with what we say our philosophies are. For those of us who wrote letters to manufacturers about chemicals many years ago, and then they wrote back, we have to hold up our end of the bargain, and it's not just chemicals, it's sort of life cycle impacts as well. We owe it to our clients and to communities to do our due diligence to make sure that we are looking at the environmental and social impacts, as well as looking at durability and aesthetics and cost. So if maybe I could recommend one thing, it's that we get really good at understanding what an EPD is and why it's important, and that we put some language in our specs at the very least that call for EPDs, and we start to that market is already growing by leaps and bounds. But the more we can get different manufacturers sort of across the spec, the different specification groups, the more we can get broad buy-in on EPDs that are comparable, that are both industry-wide and manufacturer-specific, I think the better off we are in terms of being able to make smart and informed decisions. And not to discount HPDs, because I think that they're important too, but in the context of this conversation, really being able to understand the life cycle impacts is really important, and that's your EPD.
Right.
I would, if you don't mind, Avi, if I can add to that real fast. I think it's important. We're talking about how do we build a circular economy, and how do we, there are things that are out there that are already harmful that we know about, but the no-brainer step is, if we want to truly create a circular economy, let's remove them, and then moving forward, we know that those chemicals of concern are not there. So we really do need to start to those two things go very closely together in terms of recyclability, reusability.
Right. We're going to take a few more questions from the audience here, and we're going to try and get through them somewhat quickly at this point. A quick question, and this might be good for Roxanne or Anita. Both of you definitely work a lot on the residential side as well. How do we make building product recycling accessible to residential projects? Daniel has an example of a project where, residential projects typically have smaller quantities than commercial projects, so it's hard to make them work for reclamation programs. Any tips on that? Any best practices?
I would say for residential, most of the time we will work with the dealer who has sold the project, and they can collect the material until there's enough of amount for us to pick up, so that the homeowner doesn't really have to worry about that. Whoever their installer is can take back the scrap or the previously installed material to their customer who they bought from, and then we'll pick it up at a later point when there's an accumulation. But I think we are getting more requests from homeowners who are concerned about what's in their products. We do asthma and allergy certified flooring, and in our residential division, all of the products are now certified because it's become such an ask from homeowners. So it's really nice to see that homeowners are concerned about it and that they're interested, because that's going to move the needle just as much as a large corporate building will be, because there's more kind of more of a stance with the homeowner. It's their personal facility. They've been in this home now, especially lately. We've all been home a lot. But they take great pride in what they've done in their home. So I think that will help us move some of the standards a little bit quicker, because then hopefully they'll take it back to the workplace and feel it's important to have the same level of health and recycling there as well.
Okay. Roxanne, what you're saying only underlines the importance for chain of custody documentation. And I think specification documents are important for that, but also when buildings change hands, you know, is there a process for handover of chain of custody? And owners really have to be responsible for that, to your point, Anita. So, you know, we really need everybody in the system to do their part in order for what you're saying to work. And that's just the limitation of, you know, how the marketplace works at this point. But thankfully, there is a solution for people who are renovating their own properties and who understand, you know, which dealers their products might have come from, and there are solutions there. So thanks so much, Roxanne, for talking about that. I just made this point, and that's the next question in our docket. Victor Namais asks, George raised a good point. Buildings go through many hands during their lifespan. Products can be complicated. Information gets lost. How do we bridge that gap so that someone handling a product at the end of its use knows how to do anything other than dispose of it? All of you have mentioned some strategies here, but if anybody wants to add to that, that would be great.
Hey, Harvey, this is George. So
Hi,
really,
George.
I think that it's a multi-pronged approach. I think that as competitive as manufacturers are, there needs to be a unified front to have a way to at least be able to communicate admirably as it relates to, if your material is coming out and you need to get that material back, could you trust that this manufacturer will deliver that product into a location that would be feasible for you? Most of us know that most of the companies that we use as what we call separators or dividers are shared resources. We have to get more strategic about how do we go about leveraging that, how do we use that. So that's one component. I think the second component is getting a standard of agreement with general contractors and end users to be able to establish, here's what we expect. And I think the third component, Joshua kind of spoke to, the whole Ray Anderson Everlease kind of mindset of, okay, we're going to provide you with flooring, which helps manufacturers in a certain way, because if you do a good job of delivering that flooring, whether it's hard, soft, or combined flooring in that space, at the end of its useful life, you just come back in and replace, and you're taking your material out. So it creates a good avenue for you to be able to establish your competitive advantage, and you can always compete on price, design, and all these other things. I think that there's a three-pronged approach to creating a way for us to kind of move this. And the first is probably the most unregulated, because it's just all over the place and there are no rules and guidelines. And the second is a little bit more organized, and we just need to have better conversation as it relates to the sustainability leaderships of these organizations kind of getting together and having a conversation and saying, here's what we can try to do, and then build on that. And then the third one is, how do we strategically begin to move toward creating a new model of how we actually deliver those services versus delivering actual materials that are left for others to be responsible for. So I think it's a lot of work, but I think that people are up for the challenge. And the more and more we move toward creating bad situations for generations to come that don't deserve to be in those predicaments, the more responsibility we should have in terms of having a conscience as it relates to getting beyond some of the minute differences that won't make that much of a difference in the way we compete today, and creating a better general understanding of how we're going to go to market in the future. Just one old manufacturing guy's thoughts.
No, and hopefully EPDs can be an engine of that process. You know, Ellen, your point about more call for EPDs is important, because then companies if we're transparent with each other, then even competitors within a single product category should be able to consult each other's EPDs and therefore know what's going into the product that's coming in through their own recycling stream. It might make it easier for people to recycle others' products and so on. So hopefully that's a future we're looking forward to. A couple of questions here, Joshua, along the lines of what you opened up, in terms of how do we reduce the harmful chemicals or remove the harmful chemicals that are out there in the world already. Avide has a question related to that. Adele has a question related to that. It seems that there are lots of potentially harmful chemicals out there that, were used, if we're to believe George, with good intention before we knew that they were harmful, or that, would be a real strain on the economy on the planet. I'm sorry, if we were to produce them from raw virgin material now, PVC being a good example of that. How do we deal with those materials that are out there in the world? How do we reduce them? How do we sort of almost neutralize them, so to speak? How do we take them out of the closed loop? I know Roxanne and Anita have definitely dealt with this already, but any thoughts on that from anybody on the panel? That would be great.
I mean, I think the first rule of thumb is when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And so that's part of the push for increased transparency in what's in the products that we put in our buildings. And then after that, or as a part of that process, we figure out what's in them. The part of the challenge is the regulatory environment in the United States. The EU is quite different. Other countries have different regulatory rules and structures. But for the most part, in the United States, you don't have to prove a chemical is safe before you can use it. And so that is a significant challenge in terms of keeping new chemicals out of the stream. I think BPA is probably the most infamous one of late, right? It's a relatively newly invented compound. It was in everything from baby bottles to receipts that you get, when you go to the grocery store, and it turns out that it's pretty hazardous, and it didn't have to be proven safe before it could be widely distributed. So I think there are regulatory challenges as a part of the solution here as well, right? And so in the world of, we need to work on multiple fronts to solve these problems. Regulatory solutions are a piece of that puzzle as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the next decade, while we're working with all of this, given the holes in regulatory mechanisms, especially in this country, we're thankful and glad that various organizations have helped build precautionary lists and red lists of materials. And it's unfortunately in the space, in the lack of regulatory oversight, we kind of have to self-regulate a little bit, and hopefully that will help, Joshua. It has been helping, hopefully, with what you're saying, but certainly it's not a solution. We need policy support here, and that's right. Anita, I'm wondering if you can take this question from Randy Howard. She says, as a sales consultant, this is not an area that's a strong point for us. We rely more heavily on architects, designers, and manufacturers to do the right thing and provide us the right information from a sustainability standpoint. I believe sales consultants have the same responsibility to our clients, and aren't I glad to hear that? Where is the best place for us to learn to be the steward in our part of the process? So, tell us a little bit of your experience with Armstrong Ceilings, especially with your Sustain portfolio and working with your sales team to kind of educate them and use them as a force out in the market.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from an education standpoint, we have a network of sales reps everywhere. So they are there as a resource for you. I and others have tried to do many of these collaborations with various publications, and with Metropolis. We've done a number of these sustainability series with both Living Future and USGBC in order to educate. I think education is key and awareness is key. I mean, that the number one piece of the recycling awareness, and we've done a number of campaigns We've done a Save the Ceilings campaign over the year to just to understand that there is an end-of-life solution. So we will continue to do that. If there's an opportunity to do that within your firm or your world that we can help you with, certainly contact us, and we can do that for you. But I think part of it being in some of the standards, as you mentioned, with living product and LEED and WELL, certainly will help, because then more people will have to learn about it. So that's another tactic. And I think certainly part of what the whole pandemic, we're looking at the whole reconstruction and reconfiguring of spaces. We're going to see a lot more changes within the spaces. And hopefully that brings on a resurgence of being able to look at this in a new light and look at it combined with both equity, as we talked about, and also health and safety as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to another audience question here. Really quick one for Joshua and Ellen. Has anyone on this panel achieved the lead point for reduced construction waste instead of diversion? That seems to be the direction we need to go in, but it seems unreachable currently. I wasn't aware of that as being a particularly difficult thing to achieve. Do you want to talk about whether, are you aware of that? Is that a challenge that you faced? I'd love to hear from either of you.
Joshua's on mute, so maybe I'll take a.
Yeah, oh yeah, Ellen, go ahead.
Cool. I will say that I'm not. I used to be an expert on LEED, but have sort of lost some of my skills. So this is only a partially informed question. But the LEED projects that I'm aware of that are falling under the new rating systems are not having a tremendous amount of trouble hitting at least the lower thresholds of diversion. But I do believe that there are some more specificity in the amount of the number of diversion streams, which I have seen can create a little bit more of a problem than just the general, you've either diverted 50 or 75% or you haven't.
Yeah, Avida is saying that her question was not just about diversion, but about reduction of waste, which of course is a different thing altogether. Diversion, I think she agrees with you that even though it's hard to do, it is possible. Reduction seems to be even harder. Joshua, do you have any thoughts on that, both on diversion?
Yeah, so we're so Avi, you mentioned that the Candida building was Living Building Challenge and LEED Platinum. I should just caveat that in the world of precision that we are in the performance period, so we don't have the Living Building certification yet, and we are about to submit all of our LEED documentation, so we don't actually have that certification yet either. But I will say that we have spent a lot of time, way too much time probably, on not just that credit, but one or two of the other LEED V4 credits that are trying to change the way the materials credits are structured. And even on a project like Candida, where we have red list documentation for every single product on the entire building, and we have all of these other things set up, they are, the LEED thresholds are still quite challenging actually. And even for a building that tried so hard to use so many reclaimed materials, we still struggle a little bit. And part of that is the measuring stick for LEED is cost of those materials. And so what we're finding is that the relative value of those things, even though we bent over backwards to incorporate them in the building, is still small enough that we're not actually meeting the threshold. And so we're actually trying, we haven't submitted it yet, but we're going to, like I said, very shortly, and we're probably going to end up needing to have some discussion with the reviewers at USGBC and to figure out, you know, with the level of effort we went through, and we have spreadsheets that show we're at half right where we should be, but it's because it's measured by money, and that's part of the challenge that we're having. So I think there are other measuring sticks or other data points that we could use that might be more valuable than money, pun intended. But you know, those are up for discussion in future versions, I guess.
Hey, Avi, this is George. Being on the board at GBCI, it's not a conversation that does not come past the board. there is dialogue related to how can you, and one of the suggestions that I made on the last call that we had related to those particular credits was, have we considered not just the financial cost, but also the environmental cost or the impact cost or the net impact cost incongruent to having a decision? So maybe if you use something that is a more renewable or regenerative type of product, bamboo, wood, those types of things, it has a higher impactable cost because it can be disposed of within the means of nature or reused in a certain type of way. So there are some conversations. So when those things come up, you know, there are communications, because I think the intent of the purposefulness of the particular credit was what I call directionally accurate. But until you actually go through the process, you don't get an opportunity to manifest a real project during the development phase. But pushing the envelope is what ILFI, USGBC, and Fitwell are supposed to do. And so sometimes we have to, you know, backcast, so to speak. So you set the net out way farther than you need to, and then you come back and try to find something that allows you to be able to meet those goals. So thank you guys for continuing to allow us to do our best to move the organization in a directionally accurate place across all of the different platforms that are doing good stuff. So,
George, I'll call you when we get our review comments back.
We have a quick comment from Vicky here that relates both to Joshua and Anita's comments. I just want to read it out so that you guys know that your comments have been acknowledged. Vicky says, get the local landfill involved in review of Renault construction plans and see what recycling or upcycling they can provide, so that you can go to zero landfill. Joshua, this speaks to your point about working with local resources. We have found this as a helpful starting point. Also agree with Anita on the owner retaining sustainability oversight. So obviously it's much easier for the owner to make those decisions if they are involved. So Anita, I think that's an acknowledgement of saying that, that chain of command really needs to come from the owner, as you mentioned, and that's really useful. A quick thank you to all our panelists here. Joshua Gassman from Lardic Sargent, Ellen Mitchell-Kozak from Leo A. Daly, Roxanne Spears from Target, and Anita Snyder from Armstrong Ceilings and Wall Solutions, and of course, George Bandy Jr. for all your insights and amazing conversation today. I'd love to close this out on one last note, and this can come from any one of you. Whoever wants to jump in first, please take the last word here. Joshua mentioned regenerative design, and that is a concept that lies at the heart of the circular economy. We're interested in not just keeping materials that are pulled out of the earth in constant use. That's not the point of the circular economy. The point of the circular economy is eventually to move to a regenerative place. And Anita, I know the Living Product Challenge that Armstrong has been certified with is about that. Cradle to Cradle, Roxanne, which you adopted across Target, is about that. And Joshua and Ellen, both of you have worked on projects, within the Living Building Challenge, as well as other certification standards that are about regenerative design. Certainly there's credits for that. So any one of you want to just make that connection between the circular economy and regenerative design for us? And I think we'll leave that as the last thought for our audience here. Joshua, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I would say I would like to phrase it as, I think we all need to start to think like nature, right? In natural cycles and systems, there is no waste. There is no starting point. They are all completely circular. And what is waste for one animal, one thing being decomposed, is the food for another. And the entire system is closed and sustained and balanced. And I think that should be our guidepost in terms of how we start to think about these problems.
Right, absolutely. That's a form of biomimicry, I think, that all of us need to get behind. Thank you so much, Joshua, for that closing thought. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on this panel.